Just 12 months after the fall of Kabul, now Baghdad is engulfed in gunfire and flames in another humiliation for the Biden administration. We're going to take a look at exactly what's going on in Iraq. We're going to see how once again bumbling Biden was caught completely flat-footed. And make sure to stick with me to the very end of this video when I'll reveal what the future is, not just for Iraq, but for the world order as a whole. You are not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. It's me, Dr. Steve, your Patriot Professor, here to help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. And gang, make sure to click on that link below and save up to 70% on all of Mike Lindell's MyPillow products if you use my special code Turley. You know that Mike's been canceled by Walmart, and we could show him our support while at the same time he extends his lowest prices ever over to us. So make sure to use my special code Turley, and you can get the classic MyPillow, which is normally $69.98 for only $19.98, and that applies to over 200 products in their catalog. So don't wait. Click on that link below. Let's support our fellow patriot Mike Lindell and get the best savings ever. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. My, oh my. I got to say at the outset, all right, I think it is utterly ironic that at the very time the legacy media is doing everything they possibly can to try to prop up the obvious blithering idiot in the White House, another Middle Eastern city that thousands of American troops gave their lives for to supposedly liberate is being engulfed in gunfire and flames. It was literally just a year ago this week, back in mid-August, when that same legacy media, in the midst of doing again everything they could to cheerlead and champion the very president they campaigned for, stood there in shock to watch Kabul fall at the hands of the Taliban. Just days after their president, the president their collective coup elected, said this.
Is the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not. Because you have the Afghan troops have 300,000 well-equipped as any army in the world, and an air force against something like 75,000 Taliban. It is not inevitable.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse.
That is not true.
Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether that will happen or not?
That is not true. They did not reach that conclusion.
So what is the level of confidence that they have that it will not collapse?
The Afghan government and leadership has to come together. They clearly have the capacity to sustain the government in place.
And do you see any parallels between this withdrawal and what happened in Vietnam with some people feeling?
None whatsoever. Zero. What you had entire brigades breaking through the gates of our embassy. 6, if I'm not mistaken. The Taliban is not the North Vietnamese army. They're not remotely comparable in terms of capability. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of an embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comparable. So the question now is, where do they go from here? That the jury is still out. But the likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Now, of course, we all now know that what he uttered there was absolute and total BS, which, of course, we now know is just par for the course. And you could tell by the coverage last August that the legacy media was caught themselves totally flat-footed. They had no idea how to spin in Biden's favor the fact that the Taliban had come back after 20 years to take over Afghanistan. Even CNN had to admit that Biden's botched troop withdrawal was an utter and complete and total disaster. And here we are, 12 months later, and something comparable is happening all over again. The streets of the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, have erupted into gunfire and mortar fire in some of the worst fighting seen in years in that nation. Gunshots and rocket fire are being exchanged between a militia force loyal to one of the nation's most popular Shiite clerics on the one side and Iraqi security forces and Iran-backed militias on the other. Thus far, as of the making of this video, upwards of 30 have been killed, hundreds more wounded, upwards of 700 casualties. So what's going on here, right? What's happening in Iraq? Obviously, it's a very, very complicated picture, but it appears to be revolving around perhaps the single most influential cleric in Iraq, the Shiite leader Muqtada al-Sadr. Now, what you have to know about al-Sadr is that he is without a doubt the single most populist leader in the whole nation. His father, the Grand Ayatollah Muhammad Sadiq al-Sadr, was assassinated by then-President Saddam Hussein in 1999 for leading a mass revolt of the oppressed Shiite majority against the dictatorial Sunni minority government. Muqtada al-Sadr draws powerfully from his father's martyred status as a champion of the Shiite majority who never fled Iraq, by the way. In fact, in 2003, during the U.S. occupation, al-Sadr organized a massive paramilitary militia of thousands of soldiers called the Mahdi Army, who defied the U.S. occupation for a number of years. In fact, they were the ones who initiated the insurgency against American troops. In the process, al-Sadr organized what's considered the single largest political movement in all of Iraq. And last year, in their parliamentary elections, the Sadrists secured the highest vote tally among all parties, but not enough to overcome the combined numbers of all the parties opposed to them. Since the election, Iraq's leaders have failed to put together a governing coalition, and that frustration hit a new high when just a couple of days back, al-Sadr announced that he was withdrawing from politics altogether because of the rampant corruption that infests these politicians. Sound familiar? And so with that announcement, his supporters ended up storming the presidential palace where the Iraqi parliament meets and effectively shut down governance of the nation. And in the process, Iraqi security forces and Iranian-backed Shiite militias violently clashed with Sadr's forces, and here we are. Now, I mentioned the Iranian militias. You may be wondering, hey, wait a minute, Turley, when did Iran get involved in all this? I thought we were talking about Iraq. Well, after U.S. forces entered Iraq back in 2003, Iranian leaders were obviously very concerned that they were next. They saw Afghanistan fall to U.S. troops. Now they were seeing Baghdad fall, and they thought Tehran was next. And so Iran provided massive support for Shiite militias in their fight against American forces, very similar to what we're doing right now with Ukraine and its resistance against Russian forces. And the first group that they funded was none other than the Mahdi Army, the militia of al-Sadr. And in the course of the insurgency, Iran backed two other powerful militias as well, so that by the time the U.S. government announced the withdrawal of American troops years later, Iran had massive influence and power inside Iraq. So that's how Iran got involved in all of this. But, and this is key, in many respects, I think this is the key to the whole thing. As it turns out, al-Sadr is a hardcore Iraqi nationalist that was happy to get Iran's help to kick out the Americans. But now it's Iran's turn to take a hike as well. And that's when the rift between al-Sadr's militia and Iran-backed militias began. And to add even more intrigue into all this, al-Sadr, in the process, ended up turning to the U.S. in an informal alliance because he was seen by Washington as a valuable asset that could effectively frustrate Iranian influence in wooing Iraq towards Tehran rather than in D.C. So you have all kinds of dynamics going on here. But in the end, as I understand it, al-Sadr is Iraq's nationalist populist leader. Starting with his father, he's been a faithful defender of the majority Shiite interests for decades. And his claim that Iraqi politics have been radically corrupted by foreign influences, both from the U.S. and Iran, is proving itself to have a radical galvanizing effect among the population throughout the nation. But even at a larger level, I think what we're seeing here is the emergence of a world order that's passing by the likes of Joe Biden and the old neocons and neolibs who together comprise the adults of D.C. They thought that they could translate their world, the world of globalism and secular liberalism, into Iraqi politics in a manner comparable to what they tried in Kabul. The result in both regions has been an unmitigated disaster. That world, the world of secular liberalism, that world is fading away. It's literally cracking up right before our very eyes, and that's exactly what I think we're seeing happening in Iraq. Nationalist, populist, traditionalist sentiments can be suppressed for only so long. Al-Sadr represents a multi-generational Iraqi nationalism that believes that Iraq is for Iraqis and that it's now time for U.S. and Iranian forces to go their separate ways. I have no doubt that, like the Taliban in Afghanistan, al-Sadr and our Iraqi nationalists will get their wish. As always, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button, and you will definitely want to check out my latest video on whether the FBI is starting to crack. It's fascinating, gang. You're not going to want to miss it. So make sure to check out, click on that link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.